Welcome, everyone, to our spring member meetup of the Norwegian American Historical Association, and a special welcome to our friends in Naha Norge, our Norwegian counterpart. It's wonderful to have you with us, co-hosting this event with us. And just a word of thanks for being with us. I'm glad that we could choose a time that worked in all of our time zones, and it means a lot to us to have our Norwegian colleagues with us today. So thank you. I also want to say thank you to Christina Warner, our archivist, who's serving as Zoom host behind the scenes today. So very excited about today's topic, Clausen with Jostein Garcia de Presno. Before we get going, though, I would like to just make a few announcements. For those of you who are NAHA or NAHA Norge members, you already know about this, but we're hard at work planning for our June conference at St. Olaf College, June 18th through the 22nd, or week 25, if that means anything to you. Registration is now open, early bird registration. So we encourage you to go to the NAHA website. That's probably the simplest way to find it. Go to our events and click on the conference information for more for the conference website and a chance to register early bird if you'd like to do that. Regular and a la carte registration will be available starting mid-April until May 27th. And that conference is hosted by NAHA US, NAHA Norge, and Nortana, the Norwegian Researchers and Teachers of North America, and the St. Olaf Norwegian Department. So just a few housekeeping notes before we get going. This meeting is being recorded, just so you know. It would be helpful if we kept our audio off while Jostein is speaking. And you may want to turn your video off as well because it helps with the bandwidth. So I'll be turning my video off when I'm done here. There will be an opportunity to ask questions of Jostein. I think to streamline that, feel free to put your questions in the chat, the Zoom chat at any point, and we'll be collecting those questions, and I'll be asking, as time allows, Jostein some of your questions. So if you haven't done that before on Zoom, you just mouse over at the bottom of your screen and you'll find an icon for the chat. And if you click on that, the chat will come up. I guess without further ado, I will introduce our guest today. Jostein Garcia de Presno is Associate Professor of the History of Christianity at Volda University College in Norway. He also teaches intercultural understanding and the history of philosophy there. Jostein has researched the development of the 19th century Norwegian Haugian movement and is the author of a number of articles on the subject. He's currently working on a book about Clausen and his involvement with the Norwegian Haugians. And Jostein is a member of NAHA Norge. We had the pleasure of getting to know Jostein about this time last year when he came to the NAHA archives for an extended visit. He was here for about a week and a half. And we just enjoyed getting to know Jostein and also looking over his shoulder at some of the interesting things that he was digging into during those days. So without further ado, we can hear a little bit about what Jostein has learned in his recent research. I will turn it over to you, Jostein. Welcome.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you so much. Do you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So just let me know if the video or the sound is somewhat off, and then I'll try to speak clearly. This is my Norwegian English accent. This is what you've got to deal with for the next few minutes. And today I'll be wanting to share with you some of the findings I did while I was in the US about a year ago about Clausen, or how do you actually pronounce his name? So this is the first difficulty. I would say Clausen. In Denmark, they say Clausen, and then the US, Clausen. I will be saying a mix, I think, and
Anything
just
goes.
bear with me. I'll probably be offending all parties. Um, anyway, so today I'll be telling the story. I've called it Representing the Past, the case of pioneer pastor Clausen. Uh, very much of what I'm going to say is going to be biographical. I'll be telling his story, the story of his road to immigration. So most of what I'll be saying will be taking place in Denmark and Norway on the way leading up to his immigration to the US. Now, about Clausen's life in the US, we know a whole lot, and I will be giving a short version shortly. But about his life in before coming to the US, that is much sparser. There's much sparser knowledge about that. So that's what I'll be focusing on. Now, who was Clausen? Most people haven't heard of him, but in Norwegian American terms, he was quite important. So the Norwegian American historian Holland has described him, although he was Danish, as one of the most important people to have lived and worked among Norwegian American immigrants in the US. And for most immigrants, we don't have very detailed descriptions of their life before coming to the US. Um, but for Clausen, we do have such detailed knowledge, and it is a truly fascinating story. So I think it can be, in a way, relevant beyond just the life of Clausen. I think it might be relevant for also highlighting the lives and the motivations of other people who were planning or who went to go to the US. So, what does Clausen have in common with other Norwegians or with other people immigrating to the US? Well, for one thing, he considered America his mission field. It was a mission trip. And for quite a few people at this time, we're in the 1840s, this was the case. Secondly, he thought America safer than Africa. And that was actually quite important to him. And I think he was not the only one who made that conclusion. And thirdly, there were better career possibilities for him in America than back home or anywhere else. America was really the land of opportunity, and that also played a part in bringing him to the US. So this is some of the things that I think he has in common with many immigrants who are also contemplating going to the US. So uh, let's get started. My involvement with Clausen and my interest in him is because I have been studying the Norwegian Haugian revival, which was a lay revival in Norway around the year 1800 and onwards. And as it turned out, Clausen is a very important source to the late Haugian revival. And I have been studying this revival as part of my PhD. And during my work, I discovered a diary which Clausen kept while traveling around in Norway and meeting lots of Haugians. So that's how I came into contact with Clausen. And many Haugians immigrated to the US, and so did Clausen. And there also he was in contact with the Haugians and played a very important part, though in a very different way, through his life as a pastor to Norwegians in the US. So that's how I got to know Clausen and my involvement with him through his contact with the Haugians, and that will be my entry into this as well. So who is or who was Clausen? Well, he was born in 1820 in Denmark. He was Danish. I'll be saying a lot about his life before immigrating shortly, but after coming to the US, so he immigrated there with his newlywed wife, Martha, in 1843. They went from Denmark via Norway to the US. And although he was Danish, all his pastoral work was with Norwegian immigrants. So he was with Norwegian immigrants for the rest of his life in the US, and that is why I guess he's a topic at a NAHA talk. He founded the Muskego Church, which was the first Norwegian congregation in the US in 1843, and during his life, about 20 other congregations in Wisconsin, Iowa, and Minnesota. I visited a few of them when I was there last year, And I think that actually all of these congregations still exist today, if I'm not mistaken. After a few years, he founded the Norwegian Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, which was later, or which was more commonly known as the Norwegian Synod after reorganizing. Now, this synod was the biggest and the most important synod of the different Norwegian synods or Norwegian American synods. And he was the founder or the co-founder of this. And later, after leaving the Norwegian synod, he broke out of it. He founded another one, another synod called the Conference of the Danish or Norwegian Danish Evangelical Lutheran Church of America in 1870. So he founded two synods in America during his lifetime. But he was not only limited to church work, he also started up and was the first editor of two journals, Månedstidene and Emigranten. And both of those existed for a very long time. And perhaps most importantly, many people would say, he founded what is today the town of St. Ansgar in Iowa. He went there with a group of Norwegian settlers in 1853, founded this settlement, which today has developed into a town of its own and still exists today. Later, he also tried to found another settlement in Virginia. He went there with his family, he bought a plantation and tried to start up another settlement. It didn't work out, so he went back to Iowa later. But he was very active. He also served in the Iowa House of Representatives for a period of time, for 3 years, and he was a chaplain in the Scandinavian Regiment. I think the only chaplain in the Scandinavian Regiment. So he was there. He served there for approximately 1 year. So clearly, Clausen was somebody. He has done a great, yes, maybe he was one of the most important people to have lived among Norwegians in the US. He was really somebody. But apart from these facts, what can we know about Clausen as a person? Well, he had some very clear strengths and weaknesses. Um, Among his strengths, he was loved by many. He was kind and he was caring. There are many witnesses about this. He was very accountable, extremely practical. So he was not only a pastor, but if you needed a dentist, he would be your dentist. He would be the miller and lots of other different things. He was passionate about what he did and perhaps not least about what he believed in. He was energetic. He traveled a lot. I think there was nowhere he was more happy than when he was out traveling. And when he eventually died in 1892, he was actually far, far away from his home place. So that was fitting. In a way, he was traveling. It was what he definitely loved best. He was very assertive. He was always 110% sure that he was right. Um, but he was still kind. Um, so there were many good things you could say about Clausen. There were also some weaknesses. Very literally, his health was very weak. So he had lots of health issues and problems all through his life from childhood. One thing he was criticized for by many people was that he frequently kept changing his opinion. Now, that in combination with being very assertive was not a very good combination. So being very assertive and frequently changing his opinion was a difficult combination, and he was criticized a lot for that. And he frequently also broke up and moved on to new places. And he was controversial. He was involved in numerous theological controversies with the other pastors in America. The biggest controversy was about slavery, but there were also controversies about liturgy, keeping of the Sabbath, about Grundtvigianism. We'll be hearing a bit about that. So this was a bit about Clausen as a person. And as you can see from the photo here from his funeral, a lot of people were cared about him and showed up at his funeral, and it was even photographed and documented. Presenting Clausen, I can use two terms which have been coined by the Canadian sociologist Irving Goffman. So he talks about front stage and backstage in terms of behavior or self-presentations. because self-presentations, the way we act towards others or present ourselves, they are never neutral. So we usually we all have a front stage. It's what we want people to see. And we have a backstage. It's where we prepare our front stage preparation. It's what we don't want people to see. And these terms can be quite useful when discussing Clausen. So a typical front stage presentation in immigrant terms is what we know, for instance, from Norwegian immigrants writing home to their families in Norway about their new and happy life in the US. So, for instance, like this one. Um, we're all glad to have come here. Here, there is no lack of food. There is good profit everywhere, even for the elderly and women. I think that if you, my dear brother Halvor, could come over, that you would be much better off here than you are in Norway. So that's a typical front stage presentation of their new life in the US. But there was a backstage, of course. Life in the US wasn't always happy. Um, for Clausen too, there was a backstage. But his backstage was in Denmark before coming to the US. And there wasn't everything about his life in Denmark and Norway before coming to the US, which fit so well with the front stage presentation that he was making as a pastor in the US. And this is quite interesting because we have, as it is, two versions of his life in Denmark and Norway before immigrating. One front stage version and one which I would call a backstage version. So the front stage version of Clausen's life, he wrote himself. So when he was retired, he was 65 years old, he was asked by someone who was intending to write his biography, could you please write an autobiography describing your life, which I can use in as a source for my biography? And this Clausen did. And this autobiography has been used as the main source for all later biographies and articles which have been written about Clausen. And the short version of this front stage autobiography, the part about Clausen leading up to his immigration, could have the title A Lucky Accident. Immigrating, becoming a pastor in the US was in many ways a lucky accident. And I won't be going into detail about this, but just in short, what does this say, this front stage autobiography of Clausen? So he says he grew up in Denmark um, in a peasant family. In his teens, he was spiritually awakened in his youth. Now, as a result of this, he was encouraged by his local pastor to go on to study theology because he was a clever chap and he was also very in earnest about his Christian faith. This Clausen very much wanted to do, but he couldn't because he did not have the financial means. So he briefly started his studies. He had to break off because he didn't have the financial means. So what could he then do? Well, he had health issues. So his doctor recommended him that, Clausen, it would be good for you to make a long trip to, get movement, some fresh air. Why don't you go to Norway or Switzerland, somewhere where there's lots of fresh air? Okay, said Clausen, I'll go to Norway because he had heard about Hans Nilsen Hauge, the famous Norwegian revivalist, and he wanted to visit the country of Hans Nilsen Hauge and to get to know the Haugians. So he travels to Norway for health reasons, and while he is there, he makes friends with Haugians. And through this Haugian network, he gets two proposals. Won't you come and be and join the Norwegian missionary, the first Norwegian missionary who will be going to Africa? Join him, be his companion in going to Africa as a missionary. But at the same time, through his Haugian network, he is asked by Norwegian immigrants in the US, please come to America to be the tutor for our children. They have no teacher here. They are not taught religion. Could you be the teacher for our children? us immigrants in the US. And Clausen chooses in the end to go to America to be a teacher. And once he is there, he is asked by the Norwegians there in Muskego to be their pastor, and he is ordained and he becomes a pastor among Norwegians, not just Haugans, but Norwegian immigrants in general, and then the rest is history in the US. So that's Clausen's front stage autobiography, Immigration as a Lucky Accident. In my work, I've come across different sources about Clausen. So there are letters and newspaper articles from Denmark. I also found his what you see here, the picture of here, which is the diary he kept while traveling around in Norway for 5 months in 1841 among Haugans. And I found what was or is an autobiographical letter to a friend written in 1842, the year before he immigrated. And together, these historical sources form quite a different picture, story of Clausen's road to immigration. This picture really fills in many of the blanks from Clausen's later autobiography. But more than that, it also sometimes contradicts his later autobiography. And that's why I call it a backstage autobiography or backstage self-presentation. So let's have a look for the rest of this talk about at Clausen's backstage road to immigration. And we could call the title for this story, How Do I Become a Missionary? This story is detailed, it's confusing, it's zigzagging back and forth, and all of this makes it really credible. And although maybe you won't believe this, but although what I'm going to present now is really, really detailed, this is actually the abridged, shortened version of his backstage autobiography. So, Clausen grew up in Denmark. And for those of you not fully maybe acquainted with the Scandinavian geography, here's a map of Scandinavia with Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, and then a focus here on Denmark. And Clausen, he grew up on the island of Aro, and this is where he grew up with his family. He was the fourth child of 6 children. His parents were peasants, as I said, and traders. And as he was a bright child, his father wished for him to go on to study law. So he sent him to this island of Funen, which is just north of Aro, to be as a trainee on a large estate and to get some practice with law, and so he could go on later to study law. But while on Funen, Clausen is awakened. Now, in the 1830s, we're now 1837-ish, 38-ish, and around this time, revival is breaking out in Denmark, which is a bit surprising, you might say, because, well, Denmark was a completely Christian country. Actually, it was a Lutheran country. You couldn't be in Denmark without being a Christian. That was illegal. So everybody in Denmark were part of the Lutheran Church. Then why would you need a revival? Well, many people felt that the pastors, who were all the king's men, they were all getting it wrong. They were not earnest enough about their Christian faith. They were just concerned with their wages, and they wanted to have maybe their little drink in the evening. There were lots of rumors, and they were part of the king's men. They were not really sincere about their Christian faith. So in the 1830s, a revival breaks out in Denmark on the island of Funen, just where Clausen is studying to become, or is a trainee to become, a lawyer later on. And he is grasped by this revival. He becomes a part of it. He's awakened. It changes his life forever. Clausen, he finishes his training on Funen. He's there for 3 years. He's so happy that he's finished. He's expecting that his father will now send him on to study law. But his father says, no, I need you back home. So come back home and help me on the farm instead. And Clausen is elated. He wants to go back home. He does not want to study law. So he goes back to the island of Aro and to his loving family. But things are not so harmonious when he comes back. Clausen is part of the awakened community. He becomes really, really taken up with the activity, with the revival on Arrow. Actually, he becomes the leader of the revival on Arrow. And the revivalists, they are very critical, as I said, to the pastors and to the official church. And in the lead of all this criticism, the openly critical or wing of the revival is Clausen. He even writes a poem during his years. I think it's 12 or 18 verses, I don't remember. And one of the verses goes like this: the country's teems with so-called pastors who ought to preach the word of truth, but most are like their master, the devil, full of lies and murder. Virtues and deeds are their teaching. The grace in Christ, however, is silenced. Burdens of the law for the people to carry, but the pastor himself never carries a feather. So no need to read the rest of the poem because I guess you get the gist of it. This is really anti-clerical. Clausen, he was not happy about the pastors. He thought they were not true Christians, not good Christians. And then the bishop, the leader of the church in Denmark, sets in motion a great reform, and he is going to reform, among other things, the liturgy of baptism. And the revivalists all over Denmark are opposed to this. But the bishop, he is a powerful man, and it seems like this is going to push through. So Clausen, he's even in the lead of signing a petition with tens and hundreds of other people in Denmark signing petitions. So this is the start of the modern era in Denmark, signing petitions, really going popular, a democratic opposition against this liturgy reform. And he decides then that I cannot bear to live in Denmark any longer if this is going to push through. This devil's work of reformed baptismal liturgy is going to push through. So Clausen decides, I need to flee the country. I want to become a missionary. But how? How do you become a missionary? This was the time before there was anything such as a missionary society, and you can't just go wherever you want. At least you couldn't in the country of Denmark. So Clausen wants to become a missionary, but how? Well, plan A, enroll on a ship and desert. And this really was his plan, very sincerely. So Clausen, he couldn't just enroll on a ship. He wasn't in the Navy. He wasn't a sailor. But he really thought that, okay, if I get on a ship, I could go with this ship to the heathen. And there, when the ship is, at its furthest away from Denmark, like in America with the Native Americans, then I can desert the ship. I can leave the ship and I can preach to them the gospel and I can be a missionary to the heathen. So this is his first plan of how to become a missionary. And he actually does something to achieve this. So what does he do? Well, he couldn't just board any ship, that was illegal. But he says, okay, if I apply to the Navy, then I can get a permission to go on a ship with the Navy. So he applies for a transfer from the army to the Navy. He sends a petition to the king. Can I please be transferred to the Navy? So he sends his petition and is planning to go on a ship to sail away as a missionary. However, there are problems. Back home, as I said, not everything is harmony with his family. So not only is Clausen in conflict with the church and the pastors, but he is in growing conflict with his family, particularly his father. So his father has some temperament, so does Clausen, and they clash, and his father kicks him out. Clausen comes back, his father kicks him out again. So things are not working out smoothly at home. What does he do? Well, Clausen, he's let back home again for the second time after having been kicked out. He and his father come to a sort of a ceasefire. Clausen goes back to home to live at home again. And his father changes his mind. So he doesn't like Clausen's religious revival activities, but he says, you know what? You should become a pastor. You have a good head for this. I will pay for your training. Instead of studying law, you should study theology to become a pastor. Now, you might think, oh, that would be great for revival awakened Clausen. But being a pastor is really the last thing that Clausen would like to be, because he believed that pastors were really the opposite of being revived Christians. By no means did he want to be a pastor. So he opposed his father's plans as long as he could. He wrote in his diary, who could guarantee me that, if I went to study theology, that my spiritual life would not be lost when I came to the godless university and my occupation mostly became philosophical speculations. So he was really concerned about this until he had this thought, well, if I study theology instead of becoming a pastor, then I could travel abroad as a missionary because then I have my theological training. So he turns around and he says to his father, yes, I will train to study to become a pastor. So his father starts to pay for him. Clausen starts to study to become a pastor. But before he can really start off with his studies, things get heat up between him and his father once again, and he is kicked out by his father from his home for the third time. So this plan didn't either materialize. How can Clausen become a missionary? Well, he decides, I will now go to Langeland. Langeland is the neighboring island of Ærø, and this is where the revival in Denmark now is spreading to. And Clausen, as the leader he is already traveling to Langeland. He is preaching in the illegal religious lay meetings. And he says, okay, I will go to Langeland. This will be my mission. I will be a missionary to Langeland. So he moves to the island of Langeland. And initially, his reason for moving to Langeland is that he was offered a job of tutoring revivalist children on Langeland. So he goes to Langeland to tutor revivalist children. Why would they need tutoring? Didn't they have school? Yes, they did have school. But one of the teachers in school had taught that hell did not exist. And so the revivalist families had pulled their children out of school because they said that if our children hear this and believe this, they themselves will end up in hell if they believe that hell doesn't exist. So they pulled their children out of school and they asked Clausen to be the tutor of their children at home, homeschooling. So this is Clausen's first job. He moves to Langeland, he becomes a tutor for the revivalist children, and he becomes a missionary to Langeland. So in a way, his missionary plans, they are now materializing. He's managing to live out his missionary dream, although in a little bit of a changed form on Langeland instead of among the heathen. But he is, in a way, already his missionary dream is materializing. But then problems start piling up. The first thing that happens is enter the Baptists. Now, I don't mean that Baptists are a problem in general, but for Clausen, they become a problem. So, in Evangelical Lutheran Denmark, uh, Baptists are not allowed. Only, as I said, only the Lutheran faith is allowed, and every inhabitant, every part of society, every member of society, they have to be Lutherans by law. They all have to be baptized as infants, and they all have to be part of the church. The church and state are one. There is no distinction between them. But in 1839, 1840, just at this time when Clausen is moving to Langeland, Baptist missionaries from Germany start coming in secret to Denmark. They come to Copenhagen and they come to Langeland, where the revival is blossoming. And they preach that the evangelical Lutheran baptism, infant baptism, is no good. Actually, that's not a Christian baptism at all. So you have to have a believer's baptism. Only that is a valid baptism. This strikes like a lightning bolt among the revivalists in Denmark. And this whole community, revivalist community, which has been so united against the evangelical Lutheran Church, is split into two. Some, a minority, support the Baptists and their message, and in secret start having their own assemblies, their own meetings, together with the Baptist missionaries. And some, they even are baptized themselves in secret, and they make their first Baptist congregations in Denmark in secrecy, in secret. Most of the revivalists, however, reject the gospel of the Baptists, the message of the Baptists, and they strongly reject it. They kick out the Baptists and they say, no, we believe in the infant baptism, that this is a true baptism as we have been taught since we were children, as is written in the Bible, is in our confession of faith, etc. Now, for Clausen, this becomes an existentialist threat, a big problem, because he does not know what to believe. He has always been so certain, but now he is in doubt. So he is in doubt. Is the gospel of the message of the Baptist, is this the right thing? Should I be baptized now? Or is my infant baptism okay? He does not know what to do. So that's the first problem facing him on Langeland as a missionary. There's another problem, Martha Rasmussen. So Clausen comes to tutor the children. In this house where he is tutoring the children, there's a very charming and attractive young girl, one of the revivalists. Her name is Martha, and they fall in love. And they declare their love to each other, and they are engaged. Why is this a problem? Well, it's not a problem for Clausen. It's a problem for his missionary plans, because he was planning to go to the heathen far away. But now his plans are starting to change. I know, Langeland seems fine. It's nice here. Martha's here. I have my revivalist activity. Isn't this as good as a mission as anywhere else? So he's really starting to enjoy his life on Langeland. So it's a problem to his missionary plans. And then there's a third problem. Remember that I said that Clausen applied for a transfer to the Navy? Well, the third problem is that his application for a transfer to the Navy is approved by the king. So now Clausen has to go somewhere. At least he says, I can't look like a fool and not go after I have applied and it has been granted. So he decides, okay, I will go somewhere for a trip. The Haugins, I've heard a lot about them, always wanted to get to know them better. Let me go to Norway. So this was actually the reason why Clausen went to Norway in the first place, because he had to go. He had applied for transfer to the Navy. He had to make a trip now as part of the Navy, and he decides to go to Norway. So Clausen goes to Norway for the first time. This is Clausen's first journey to Norway, and it's in the Easter of 1841. He goes by ship from Langeland to Bergen on the west coast of Norway. And he meets up with the Haugins there. Now, the Haugins, this is already a big movement in Norway, and some of the most prominent Haugins, they live in Bergen. And he is with them for a week or 2 weeks, and he joins their assembly. He preaches. He's good at preaching. He's a lot of preaching experience from his revivalist activities in Denmark, and he preaches to the Haugins, and he loves being there. They love him. And one thing more, when in Bergen with the Haugins, he gets to know Grundtvig, this Danish pastor and theologian and author and later politician, this grand personality, because the Haugins in Bergen, they like Grundtvig and they say, you have the greatest theologians of all time in your own country. Do you know him? Well, I've heard of him, says Clausen, but I don't really know him. So one result of Clausen's first trip to Norway is that when he comes back, let me see, I skipped a little quickly there. When he comes back, he wants to visit Grundtvig. But before that, let me say a little bit about the Haugins he joins in Norway. So who were the Haugins? Well, Hans Nielsen Hauge, he was the great revivalist of Norwegian church history. So he was a son of a peasant himself, similar to Clausen. He grew up and he um, decided that he had a great spiritual sort of revelation while out in the field. This changed his life completely, and he started traveling around Norway, and this caused or came to be the start of what is Norwegian history is called the Haugian Revival, and became like the first national folk movement in Norway. So this was around the year 1800. And now in 1841 or 1840, when Clausen is traveling to Norway, the Haugans, they are well established all over the southern part of Norway. In almost every town and every city, there are Haugans. They are part of the state church. You still couldn't be outside the state church, neither in Denmark nor in Norway. But they have their own religious assemblies, usually on Sunday afternoons, and it's this pietistic and many would say very legalistic form of Christianity. They are very concerned about how they live and that their Christian faith should have consequence for the way they lived. They were not fond of laughing or walking too quickly or wearing nice colors. So they were a strict lot. And this is people Clausen meets up with in Norway. And it's with these Haugans that he gets to hear about Grundtvig, this great Danish theologian. So that's a bit strange. But the result of it is that when Clausen goes back to Denmark, he comes back to Langeland and he goes straight off to Copenhagen to meet Grundtvig. He goes to Copenhagen, he meets Grundtvig and his companions, and he gets what you might call a second awakening. He is taken in with Grundtvig's, what has been called in retrospect, his matchless discovery. Now, Grundtvig's matchless discovery is that baptism is not based on the New Testament. Baptism, as a Christian rite or ritual, existed before the New Testament. Even in the New Testament, you can read this. Jesus gave the command to his disciples, baptize each other, baptize Christian believers. So, says Grundtvig, he points out, since baptism has existed before the New Testament, which was assembled or, put together much later on, baptism is independent of the New Testament. Now, this was very effective against rationalist theologians at the university who were claiming that the Bible is all full of mistakes and we can't really trust what says there. So Grundtvig's matchless discovery is made in discussion with the rationalists at the university. But at this time, his matchless discovery plays a different role against the Baptists, who were just coming to Denmark, and who were saying that this baptism is something we have discovered now, actually in the 19th century, that the infant baptism, which you have been practicing all throughout, is wrong, and we need to start having believers' baptism. So Grundtvig's matchless discovery about baptism, the grace of baptism that we get from God as we are baptized, becomes a weapon against the Baptists in Denmark. And for Clausen, when he hears the message, Grundtvig's message about baptism, about the covenant of baptism, the grace of God being given through baptism, through infant baptism, all his troubles with baptism and being rebaptized or whatever, they are all gone. He gets his second awakening in a way. And now he has a message to preach to others. He wants to preach Grundtvig's brilliant theology, his matchless discovery about the covenant of baptism. So, back on Langeland, after having visited Grundtvig, Clausen decides to go to Norway again, to travel among the Haugans, the legalistic Haugans, to proclaim Grundtvig's gospel of the baptismal covenant. So he goes on his second missionary journey to Norway. So this is, you could call it his plan D of becoming a missionary. So he started by going to Langeland. Now he expands. He goes to Norway. At least it's a different country. And now he really wants to travel in the footsteps of one of his great heroes, Hans Nielsen Hauge. And he actually does a trip in the footsteps of Hans Nielsen Hauge. So just a few months after having come back from Norway, he goes on another trip. And this time it's not just for a couple of weeks, it's for 5 whole months. So he travels to Langeland, comes to Norway, and he travels around through the southern part of Norway from Haugen community to Haugen community, preaching in their assemblies every day for 5 months. He is really a missionary, a Grundtvigian missionary to Norway. And all the while, he writes this diary. So it's all really, really well documented. And as a person from Denmark, they only have their flat surfaces mostly. When he sees Norwegian nature, he's elated. He loves traveling around the Norwegian mountains and the glaciers and the waterfalls and all of this. And he loves this. He loves being in Norway, traveling among the Norwegians. So he traveled around from Haugen to Haugen for 5 months, preaching the Grundtvigian gospel of the covenant of baptism and the grace of God through baptism. And he says, actually, there's no need to be so stressed out about conversion as you are preaching all the time. Just accept the grace from God that you have already received through baptism. While in Norway, he comes to Stavanger, which is on the west coast of Norway. And just when he is there, the Haugens in Stavanger are planning to set up the first Norwegian missionary society. In Clausen, he is invited to sit in on a meeting for the planning of this missionary society, which actually materializes just the following year and becomes Norway's first missionary society. So he sits in on this meeting. The Haugens are planning to establish not just a missionary society, but a mission academy, a missionary academy, where you can train to become a missionary. This was, of course, a perfect fit for Clausen, who for the past few years, had been dreaming to become a missionary, longing to become a missionary, striving to become a missionary. So he says, I'm in. I'll be your first student. I'll come back next year when you set up this missionary academy, and I'll join you. So this is Clausen's, you could call it Plan E, to become a missionary, enroll in the missionary academy, which will start up in Stavanger. He's done with his trip in Norway, comes back to Langeland, tells it all to Martha, who is not very happy. She does not want to go to Africa. She wants to break off the engagement. So Clausen is back on Langeland, does not want to know what to do. He does not want to break off his engagement. Then he's invited to come back to Norway for the third time. And this time, some other Haugens in Norway are saying, we are now planning to send out our first missionary to Africa. His name is Schröder. He will be the first Norwegian missionary from this Norwegian Missionary Society. Would you like to be his companion going to Africa? Clausen has to find out. So he goes back to Norway. For the third time, he goes back to Norway and he meets up with Schröder. That sounds interesting, but he also does what he likes most. He travels around another round trip around Norway, preaching in Haugen assemblies. So now he has another offer of becoming a missionary. So once he didn't have any offers, he didn't know how to become a missionary. He made his own plans. Suddenly now he could join the school in Stavanger, or he could just join Schröder going to Africa. While traveling around in Norway for the third time, he is then given another offer. The Haugens in another city, in Drammen, they hear from their friends and relatives who have immigrated to the US. And the Haugen immigrants in the US, in Muskego, say to the Haugens in Norway, can you find someone to come and be a tutor for our children so they can learn true Christianity? And the person you see to the right here, Tollef Bakke, he's the leading Haugen in Drammen, and he asks Clausen, Clausen, would you like to be this tutor in America? So suddenly Clausen has yet another offer, but this one is not taking him to Africa to be a missionary, it's taking him to be a tutor in America. Clausen has a lot of his mind. He goes back to Denmark and he discusses with Martha. From starting out being very critical of the church, uh, now he wants to become a pastor. He wants to become a missionary. He wants to preach the word of baptism, the grace of baptism. And he wants to be a missionary. But should it be in America or should it be in Africa? He discusses it with Martha. Martha is still not happy about Africa. America, though, is fine. Yes, she would join him going to America. For Clausen, these are both mission outreaches. These are both him as a missionary. In America, he would be a missionary among Norwegians. In Africa, he would be a missionary among heathen. So together they decide that they will go to America, which means they can get married. So in the autumn of 1843, they get married and they prepare to immigrate. And they leave Denmark in the Easter of 1843, 2 years after Clausen's first trip to Norway. They go to Norway for the last time together to join up with the son of Tollef Bakke in Drammen, who was already an immigrant to America, to Muskego, and he was been back home in Norway for a while, and now he's going back to America. And they join him and they go to America for good. What was it that tipped the scale for Clausen in favor of America instead of going to Africa, we could ask? Well, there were several things. For him, these were both mission outreaches, so he didn't see them as qualitatively very different. Schröder's departure to Africa was delayed. Clausen was impatient. He wanted to go immediately to America. He could go immediately, so that was one thing. Martha, she would go to America. She was not happy about going to Africa. That was also important. And Clausen did not want to break off his engagement. But perhaps most important of all was that in America, he could be ordained. He could not be ordained as a pastor in Norway because he didn't have theological training, nor in Denmark, same reason he didn't have theological training. But in America, where there were no Lutheran pastors, he could be requested by a congregation to be ordained as there were no other options. If another Lutheran pastor, for instance, a German immigrant, could ordain him. Why was ordination so important for Clausen? Well, for a person who had adopted his Grundtvigian beliefs that baptism is where you receive the grace of God, to baptize somebody, you had to be a pastor, of course. So becoming a missionary without being a pastor was suddenly not an option at all. So from once having criticized all pastors from not being true Christians, Clausen had come to the conviction now that to be a true missionary, you also had to be a pastor. And perhaps this was the most important reason for him to choose America over Africa, that in America he could proclaim the gospel of baptism. And this is also what happened when he came to America. Once in Muskego, the people there requested that he be their pastor. He willingly agreed, and he was baptized. Within 2 months, he was a pastor, and he never looked back. He never actually became a tutor in America. He was always a pastor. And his whole life in America, he was a pastor to Norwegian immigrants. So that was the backstage story of Clausen's road to immigration. Compared to the front stage story, it is more detailed, it's more fun, it's more confusing, full of zigzags, as I said. Um, it's very understandable how Clausen composed his front stage presentation. It's more fitting to his clerical career in the US. It didn't seem fitting anymore that as he was a pastor among Haugians that he had once tried to be a missionary among them in Norway. That was not so fitting. And that he had criticized pastors when he himself became a pastor, not so fitting. So he left those things out. His backstage road to becoming a missionary didn't fit so well with his actual career. That's understandable. I think it's probably the case for all of us to some degree. Um, the front stage version of his road to immigration is maybe more of a myth, a fitting to a myth, and his backstage more to a man, a fallible man. For me, I prefer the backstage account. I don't think it makes him any less of a man, maybe rather the opposite. So that was my presentation about Clausen's road to immigration. Thank you for listening.
Well, thank you, Jostein. That was fascinating. Um, and I told Jostein before the presentation that this was a topic I knew very little about. So this was just perfect, I think, primer on the man. Um, I'm wondering, we have just a couple of minutes that we could ask a question or two. If anyone in the group has a question they'd like to throw in the chat. We've got one here. Okay, yeah. So Erin Wiebe, who's actually our um, project archivist here at NAHA, was wondering if you were expecting the difference that you found between the front stage and the backstage versions of Clausen. Is that
I
something?
was definitely not expecting it, and I think you cannot expect the source to be there if you don't know about it. But when it's there, it does make a lot of sense because it fills in some blanks and some odd things in Clausen's later old age autobiography, which just he describes things which just happening and he doesn't give any reason. So his backstage biography definitely makes more sense and it fills in a lot of blanks, in my opinion.
There's another question here about a first wife. Comment
Yep,
on his first wife and when she wrote her published church song. Does that
yep.
sound
So
familiar to you?
yep. So Martha, whom he married in Denmark and who immigrated with him, is his first wife.
Mhm.
And she went with him to Muskego, and she died in Luther Valley, where he became a pastor after having been in Muskego, and she's buried there today. She is famous for having written a hymn, which exists both in Danish and in an English version. There is a question whether she did write this or not, because in some books it says that this hymn actually existed before Clausen went to America. I'm no expert on whether she wrote it or not. I have found, as part of my work, as part of my research, a letter from Martha from before she immigrated, which written in rhyme, the whole letter. So it really does show that she was into writing poetry in a way. Instead of writing prose, she wrote it on rhyme. So she was into that. Whether that is an argument for or against, I couldn't say, but yes. So Martha is his first wife, and she married a Norwegian immigrant after Martha died.
In your research, do you have any comments about Clausen's role as a chaplain in the American Civil War? Anything to say about that?
Well,
Be a whole nother book, huh?
uh, that is another book. He wrote some letters and a short account of his role in the Scandinavian regiment himself, and people have written about this. It wasn't for a very long time. He was troubled by the experience in the war. I think there are some stories of him stepping in for other soldiers so that they wouldn't be punished when they couldn't face the war duties. Um, I couldn't say a whole lot about it, but it is clearly an expression of his clear stance against slavery, because none of the other pastors joined a regiment in the Civil War on that side. So it was, I think, out of his pure conviction that he decided to join.
All right. I think we're at the top of the hour. I think we should leave it there for now.
Hmm.
Um, if there are questions that people want to follow up with you, Stein, we can share your email address.
Sure, yes, go ahead.
And if people have um, more detailed questions or follow-up questions, perhaps you could send them directly to you, Stein. So
Sure, no problem.
fantastic.
Yeah,
Um, just one quick announcement that I did not make before Stein's talk, and that was I meant to just tell NAHA members to save the date. We have chosen the date for our centennial banquet. It's going to be October 25th at McNamara Alumni Center at the U of M in Minneapolis. So just jot it on your calendar, Saturday, October 25th, and there'll be more information coming in e-news. And I would just encourage people to keep an eye on our e-news and our newsletter. This year, it's a busy, very busy year, exciting year. And I'm so glad, Stein, that you could be part of this very special year for us, our centennial year, the bicentennial of Norwegian migration. And this topic was just fantastic. Thank you so much.
thank you so much for having me. I'm so sorry I won't be able to join you in week 25. I'm sure you'll have a great program, and I'll be hearing from people who are going from colleagues of mine who will be going there. So I'll be happy to follow up on them.
All right. Well, and I want to say thanks to everyone who took time out of your day, wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining us. We so appreciate your interest in these topics.